On this episode, I'm here with Domenic Thomas of Warbly. How are you today?
Doing well, thank you.
So could you tell me a little bit about the problem you're trying to solve with this?
Yeah, so the idea behind Warbly was to solve the barrier to entry for the casual user in the blockchain ecosystem. The current setup that we all have, it's exchanges and wallets, and moving fiat in and out is very difficult. And from our perspective, we thought that this would make it prohibitive to ever get mainstream adoption for blockchain technology.
Okay, and then so how are you solving that, making it easier?
Well, we figured that any solution to the issue is going to need to meet global compliance standards. You're not going to get very far if whatever your technical solution is doesn't meet those requirements. We know that regulators have been circling around blockchain, certainly far more in the last few years than they had been previously. And so our idea was that there are some solutions that are private, sort of entirely permission blockchains, and that maybe we could take an intermediary step with a public blockchain that anybody can develop on, but that the blockchain itself meets compliance standards all the way through the nodes. And then if we were to actually incubate and build a bank that was sort of built by crypto people for crypto people and met these compliance standards, that we could build a way for users to have a sort of single sign-on account where they can bring fiat in, purchase any tokens that they might need to access various decentralized applications, and easily be able to exit back to fiat if needed.
And are you targeting certain countries with this?
Well, really, we want a global solution in the end. However, initially, it'll most likely, at least the network, of course, is rolling out shortly here. We'll be launching publicly November 1st, and then beginning of 2019 will be the sort of active development for the crypto financial institution that we're building. And it'll likely roll out in certain markets initially, as compliance in some markets a little bit easier than others. But we feel like our solution will pass muster in most of the global jurisdictions. So we think very shortly thereafter, we can hopefully make it available to anyone.
So you are developing your own independent blockchain?
Yes. So it's an EOS fork. And so we've taken the EOS code base mostly as is, and then we've added various smart contracts and eventually a governance layer built around compliance. And we recruited our own block producers that we knew would be willing to meet the compliance requirements that we have. Because one of the key things with a blockchain is that it's not just the blockchain that needs to be compliant, or even the user accounts or the applications on the blockchain, but really all the way down to the nodes. So in something like EOS's delegated proof of stake, the block producer organizations can be compliant. So when we were looking for blockchains that we thought we could build something like this on, we looked at, at least a dozen different chains. Of course, Ethereum and some Neo, NEM, Hyperledger, and then some of the other language-based chains like Lisk and Stratus. But in the end, we settled on EOS for the transaction speed and the governance layer. But then also the real killer feature for financial services is account recovery.
So you can recover your accounts in the system?
Yeah. So with the EOS blockchain, one of the features that Dan Larimer really built into the EOS software is that you can designate a sort of a real life person in your life that you hopefully trust very much, depending on the amount of assets you might have in your EOS.io account. You certainly want someone that you trust and is reliable, but they can almost act as a sort of a trustee for your account. And therefore, there is a procedure whereby if you were to actually lose your private keys, there's a process where you can engage with this individual, and between the two of you, you can actually recover your account.
Okay. And what are some of the compliance issues that maybe some of the other blockchains aren't fulfilling?
Well, namely that, first and foremost, no one can be anonymous who's a part of the chain. So again, the nodes, right? So in EOS, it's block producers. Have to put them through a corporate AML KYC. So we need to know everyone in the organization, who they are, that they are not engaged in any nefarious financial, transacting, that the organization itself has clear financials. There'll be an auditing process for their finances that we will do as the Werbly Foundation, which is the organization that will sort of be in charge of compliance for the blockchain. And the other issue is really AML KYC at the user level. And so the innovation that we're bringing is that we're getting the AML KYC kind of baked into the blockchain at the user account level, so that the user only has to go through it once, and then applications can simply query the user account to determine whether or not they're verified, and then they don't have to worry about it either. It takes it out of the hands of the developers. Werbly Foundation is the trusted third party that is guaranteeing, in fact, that the user is verified and meets compliance. And those are really the key features. There's some other smaller governance features just surrounding, for example, that we will eventually be creating and building auditing tools for the network's transactions to be sure that we're not seeing any patterns that, again, might be akin to money laundering or improper financing.
So what have been some of the challenges of developing this project?
Well, interestingly, one of the bigger challenges is perception. The blockchain community as it stands now, I'd say we're still in the innovator phase, even that sort of famous bell curve of innovators and early adopters. I'd say we're still really in the innovator phase mostly, maybe moving into early adoption, but that I think that the blockchain community kind of cut their teeth with Bitcoin and this, decentralized, anonymous transacting. And so it can be a leap. There's a lot of fear around how we're going to do this and where the user data will be stored or who will have access to it, and with good reason. Absolutely, we are big advocates ourselves of user privacy, and we certainly don't want users' data to be compromised or given to anyone that they don't want it given to. But there's some fear. And then I think, again, there's just a lot of legwork. We've probably spent, I'd say, at least $50,000 in just legal alone, reviewing various things. Almost all of our documentation, our white paper, kind of everything we make public in regard to the project has to be reviewed. We've had to be very careful about fundraising. We really doing an ICO would be a challenge for us had we chosen to do so. So it's just something that's top of mind. But I think, again, the real struggle is perception, helping the community that's building around Werbly to realize that they can trust the project to take their best interest into consideration. And then kind of the moving target. I mean, no one really knows what blockchain compliance, cryptocurrency compliance is going to look like. We've seen global governments issue various statements, and I think everybody's familiar with kind of the Chinese yo-yo that went on last year. It was like every other day it seemed like there was an announcement from the government that they were banning cryptocurrency, and then it was okay, right? And so it's really it's a moving target, but we're taking the stance that if we meet or exceed the highest global standard, that for the most part that will work in just about any jurisdiction.
Do you see any movement coming on the regulatory front? It seems like the U.S. has been kind of sitting on their hands.
Yeah, I'm surprised by that. I really am. Maybe some people aren't, but it felt like maybe mid to late last year that the SEC was starting to issue some statements, and I felt they were moving that way. And I know that recently, the recent news at least, is that there's been an appointment made to the SEC who is cryptocurrency friendly. So I think that bodes well for us, meaning that, the individual is known to be a vocal proponent of blockchain technology and cryptocurrency and thinks that there's value there. But I am, I'm not hearing a lot. I'm kind of surprised by the lack of movement in some ways. I'm wondering if the fact that the market's cooled off so much and that there's a lot less volume, that maybe regulators feel like they have a little bit of time, that there aren't as many consumers engaging with the technology as there were near the end of last year and early this year. But I think that, anybody can attest to, when you first get into blockchain, there's a real learning curve. It's kind of a different paradigm. It's a different way of looking at transactions, right? I mean, trying to get your head around blockchain technology, even at a real base level, is difficult. It's not a simple technology. It's rather complex in certain layers. So I would imagine that a lot of these governments are struggling to really get their minds around what the potential is, and maybe, thinking through what some of the future use cases are and how those might play out. So I guess that maybe because of the total market cap of the cryptocurrency kind of market is lower than, most of your top 100 companies in the world, that they probably feel like they have a little bit of time to figure some of this out.
Yeah, I'm really worried that we're going to look back at this time and see it as a big missed opportunity. We could have been doing here in the States quite a bit of regulation while the markets were more mellow. If we have another big, crazy, big boom time, it's going to be much harder to get the regulations through because people are going to be much more upset about things.
Right. Yeah. I mean, so, again, the consumer protection aspect of it. I mean, one of the things that we felt was critical out of the gate was digital asset insurance. I mean, we're all just used to, especially in developed countries, having, fiat insurance. I mean, really globally in most places, if you put your money in a bank, that there's an insurance product there that's backing it. If that bank were to fail or something were to happen, that, your money's not going to just evaporate. And we don't have those type of consumer protections in the blockchain industry right now and in the cryptocurrency markets. It's very much a kind of a sort of Wild West is the word you hear. You need to know how to protect yourself. And there's some advantages to that type of environment for the savvy user. There's a lot of freedom, kind of control of your money and what you do with it and where it goes. However, I think that unfortunately, history tells us that most people don't care too much about that. They're far more concerned about disaster scenarios and what happens if they do make a mistake. And it's not going to be palatable that, oh, by the way, I'm sorry, your money's gone, or your assets are gone and they're unrecoverable. So certainly if we get to the point where there's millions of people entering blockchain and the cryptocurrency markets, and we start to have mistakes and phishing and all of these other things going on, most likely people come with the pitchforks, right? And they're going to want to go probably too far the other way. So I absolutely agree with you that some preemptive regulations and guidelines would probably serve everyone. Unfortunately, I don't have the type of political clout or contacts to make any of that happen. But I also think to your point, there's a missed opportunity. I think we all know, those of us in this industry, in this space, that this is the future, or at least it's a big part of the future of technical, evolution of humanity. There's a lot of use cases for blockchain, maybe not as many as some people think, and maybe a lot more that we're unaware of at this time, but it's a leap. It's the first time in history where we have something like triple ledger accounting. When double ledger accounting was introduced, global trade exploded. It's really arguably given the main reason why that was possible. Otherwise, how could you travel hundreds of miles in the ancient world and purchase something and then, be able to bring those goods, make a deal far away and then come good by bringing the product or service and getting paid and accounting for all of that commerce and activity. It was the advent of banking, really, and all of these things. And so a lot of people believe triple ledger accounting is going to kind of set off a similar economic boom in the way in which we conduct business globally. So that alone is a major leap. But the countries and the jurisdictions that I think embrace this and find a reasonable, rational way to protect individuals but still allow innovation are going to be the clear economic winners.
Seems like Worbly would be very well positioned if the regulators do overreact.
Yeah, I like to think so. I'll say we're kind of counting on that in a way, meaning that, our strategy is built around overreaction, assuming that they're going to, at some point, take a look at us if we're successful. Sort of a problem we hope to have in that if we're successful in building out this network and getting hundreds of applications to launch and that we have a huge user base, that certainly will catch the eye of various regulatory bodies. And we want to be prepared to say that, we tried to think of just about every scenario that regulators may want to come at us and have workshopped this with a lot of smart people and lawyers and accountants and said, what are the potential pitfalls here? And how do we expect or anticipate that regulators, what are they going to want to see, right? And what's most important? Because again, I think what people often forget with legal or regulatory environments is that intention is a big part of it. If it really looks like from start to finish you've tried to do the right thing, even if you miss something or a regulatory ruling comes down, and it's hard for you to get into compliance, you'll often be given a grace period to make things right. So we think that would show through to regulators for sure, that our intention was there to be compliant from the beginning with everything we've done, and that most of the standards we're putting into place are, do meet or exceed existing requirements. And so many of them kind of exceed, because blockchain allows us to do things like have an immutable ledger. And so we can do things like build machine learning and AI to take a look at financial transactions and look for potential nefarious patterns, stuff like that. So I feel confident that we're in a good place.
So what are some of your plans for the future?
Well, like I said at the beginning, the network launch will be November 1st. And so that will be the introduction of our user account, really. We're calling it our share drop portal because we're dropping tokens on the EOS mainnet token holders in hopes that they'll come over and create accounts on Worbly. Because we are a fork, they do need to create a separate account. So that's kind of the big news right now, and most of our resources are dedicated to that. And then we hope to add features slowly to that user account. One of the things we're doing is working with BitShares to bring the BitShares DEX to our network and to our users. We want that to be available. We'd certainly like to see exchanges launch on our chain, and we're in discussions with some groups who are very interested in doing that, but we always want a sort of decentralized option for users. And so we're working with BitShares. So that's something that we hope to develop. And then really it'll be incubating and developing what we're calling Gamma Financial, which would be our cryptocurrency financial institution. And that's for the beginning of 2019. I think 2019 will be really about the dApps that we're already talking to that are in development to launch on our network, attracting more. We want there to be a lot of consumer choice, because we believe that for fair financial services, you do need choice, you need options, you need some healthy competition. So those are really the things that we have on our roadmap right now.
Well, very interesting. It sounds like a very unique project. Was there anything that I should have asked you that maybe I missed?
Well, I think we definitely went for the overview. I will say, yeah, it is unique in a sense that, as far as I know, we're the only public blockchain trying to create a compliant environment for both users and developers. And the interesting thing is that in order to do that, you need to start off centralized and then decentralize over time. Because, of course, we need the compliance to be built into the network at such a core layer that as we open it up for users to be able to direct the future of the network, they can't have the opportunity to undo that, right? Because as we're trying to bring on these financial businesses, they need the reassurance that, they're not going to spend all this time and energy and money developing an application or bringing their business to our blockchain. And then 6 months, a year, 2 years, 5 years from now, all of a sudden the blockchain is no longer compliant because the community decided to vote out AML KYC, for example, right? So we have a kind of interesting attack vector. And we've talked about this at the governance layer in that, of course, we want to decentralize as much as possible. We're still, the team we're blockchain people, right? We're blockchain evangelists. We believe in the technology. We believe in the principles of, decentralization and all of those things. But at the same time, you can only go so far in a compliant environment. There are certain rules that kind of dictate what needs to be in place. So it's something that, we're working on and figuring out.
Well, thank you so much for coming on the show.
Yeah, I appreciate it. Thank you very much for your time. Appreciate it very much.
Hello, if you like this episode and you want to hear more like it, please make sure you subscribe to the podcast. That way you'll get every single episode. The Talking Cryptocurrency podcast is available on all podcast clients. You can subscribe to the show on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Pocket Cast, Stitcher, Spotify, or wherever else you listen to podcasts. And if podcasts aren't your thing, I publish video versions of these interviews on YouTube and DTube, so you can subscribe there too. All the links to all that stuff is going to be in the show notes. So please, if you want to hear more of this show, subscribe.